My name is Maya. I am 33 years old, and for our fifth wedding anniversary, my husband Marcus handed me a luxury 14-day cruise ticket. He smiled, telling me I needed a break from my little lotion mixing hobby. What he did not know was that my neighbor had just given me a 7-minute warning that would shatter my entire reality. She told me to pretend I forgot my passport and hide in the bathroom. I followed her advice and uncovered a betrayal so deep it almost destroyed me. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace. The anniversary dinner took place at an overpriced steakhouse downtown. Marcus had insisted on this place. He wore his tailored suit and the expensive gold watch he bought himself for his last promotion at the bank. He was a loan officer who thrived on the image of success and status. I sat across from him wearing a simple dress I had bought on sale 2 years ago. We had explicitly agreed to save money this year, but Marcus always found a way to bend the rules when it came to his own public image. He ordered an expensive bottle of imported wine without even asking what I wanted to drink. That was typical Marcus. He liked to control the narrative and make all the decisions. Halfway through the meal, he reached into his suit jacket pocket and pulled out a thick white envelope. He slid it across the white tablecloth with a smug grin. His chest puffed out slightly as he watched me open it. Inside was a premium ticket for a luxury Caribbean cruise. 14 days, fully paid, no cell service, no internet access. It was designed for total disconnection from the outside world. I stared at the glossy paper as a cold knot formed in my stomach. Marcus was notoriously cheap when it came to my personal needs. Just last month, he complained endlessly about the electricity bill going up because I was running my cosmetic mixers in the garage. He completely refused to pay for a new water heater, saying we needed to be financially responsible adults. Yet here he was, casually dropping thousands of dollars to send me away for 2 weeks on a boat. "You have been stressing too much over your little at-home lotion mixing hobby," he said. His tone was dripping with heavy condescension. "You need to go offline for 2 weeks. Just relax and let the real world fade away for a while." I looked up from the ticket. My little lotion mixing hobby. That was what he called the organic cosmetics business I had been building from the ground up for the past 3 years. He loved to belittle my hard work. He loved to remind me that he brought in a real salary with a real corporate title. He truly thrived on the power dynamic of being the primary financial provider, at least in his own mind. "Are you sure we can afford this, Marcus?" I asked carefully. "You just told me last week that we needed to cut back on our weekly groceries." He waved his hand dismissively while taking a large sip of his expensive wine. "Do not worry about the finances, Maya. I am a bank executive. I know exactly how to manage our money. Besides, I got a great bonus this quarter. I want you to have this trip. You look incredibly tired lately. That cheap shea butter smell is practically baked into your skin at this point. Go get a tan and relax." His words were dressed up as a thoughtful gift, but they felt exactly like a sharp insult. I forced a polite smile and thanked him quietly. The rest of the dinner was absolutely agonizing. He spent the entire time talking about his bank colleagues, his upcoming networking events, and how much his older brother David admired his success. He constantly sought external validation. His mother Cora always praised him for his financial intelligence, and she made sure everyone knew it. She constantly compared me to his brother David and his wife Sarah. Sarah was white, and she came from a very wealthy suburban family. Cora treated her like absolute royalty. Every single family gathering was a perfect opportunity for Cora to highlight how Sarah was elevating the family status, while I was just a burden dragging Marcus down. Cora never missed a chance to tell me that a true wife helps her husband build a real legacy. She acted as if my business was a childish distraction that kept me from serving her son properly. Marcus soaked up that maternal approval. He wanted to be the ultimate golden child. He desperately wanted to prove to his mother that he was just as successful as David. That was exactly why he bought the expensive gold watch. That was why he insisted on dining at elite places we could barely afford. The car ride home was completely silent. Marcus blasted the radio and tapped his fingers aggressively on the steering wheel to the beat of the loud music. He seemed giddy. He seemed entirely too happy for a married man who was about to spend 2 full weeks completely away from his wife. When we finally got back to the house, he immediately went to the living room to watch the basketball game. I went into the master bedroom to start packing my bags. My late grandmother had left me this house. It was a beautiful, sprawling brick colonial that she worked her entire life to pay off entirely. Marcus moved in right after we got married. He always acted like he owned the place. He bought cheap modern furniture to replace my grandmother's beautiful antique pieces, claiming they made the house look poor and outdated. I tolerated his behavior because I believed in marital compromise. I genuinely believed in supporting my husband through everything. The next morning came far too quickly. Marcus was up and fully dressed before my alarm clock even went off. He was bustling around the kitchen making fresh coffee and whistling a very cheerful tune. It was completely out of character for him. Usually he complained loudly about early mornings and dragged his feet. Today he practically shoved a warm travel mug into my hands and carried my heavy suitcase straight to the front door. "Have a great time, babe," he said, kissing my cheek quickly. His eyes were constantly darting toward the front window, checking the street outside. "The Uber is pulling up right now. You really do not want to miss the boat." I looked at his face closely. He was sweating slightly around his forehead. His right foot was tapping anxiously against the hardwood floor. He was physically rushing me out of the historic home my grandmother built for our family. I grabbed my purse and stepped out onto the front porch. The crisp morning air hit my face, waking me up completely. I walked down the long driveway toward the waiting car. The driver loaded my heavy suitcase into the trunk while Marcus stood on the porch waving like an excited child. My stomach churned violently with a sudden dark feeling that I could not simply ignore. Something was terribly wrong with this entire picture. I had absolutely no idea that my neighbor was watching everything from her yard. I had no idea that turning around would be the most important decision of my entire life. Before my hand could even touch the door handle of the waiting car, a strong grip clamped down on my wrist. I gasped and spun around. It was Mrs. Jenkins. She was 65 years old, a retired court clerk, and the undisputed eyes and ears of our entire neighborhood. She had lived next door since I was a little girl running around the sprinklers. Nothing escaped her sharp gaze. She pulled me hard behind the thick row of privacy hedges separating our driveways, completely out of sight from my front porch. "What are you doing, Mrs. Jenkins?" I hissed, trying to pull my arm away. "My Uber is right there and Marcus is watching from the window." "Keep your voice down, Maya," she whispered fiercely. Her eyes were wide and urgent. Her grip on my wrist was surprisingly tight. "You cannot get in that car. You cannot go on that trip. You need to turn around right now." I stared at her in total confusion. "I have a flight to catch for a cruise. I said I am already running late." "Listen to me very carefully," she commanded. Her tone was absolute. "You know I walk my dog every morning at 5. Well, this morning I saw a familiar white Range Rover parked 2 blocks down the street, hidden behind the old oak trees. It has been sitting there for hours with the engine off." My heart skipped a beat. A white Range Rover. That was Sarah. Sarah was my sister-in-law, married to Marcus' older brother, David. She was the one woman in the world who made my skin crawl. Sarah was a wealthy white woman who constantly made passive-aggressive comments about my hair, my business, and my presence in the family. She would ask questions like, "How often do you have to wash hair like that?" or suggest that my organic cosmetic line was just a cute little urban project. Cora worshipped the ground Sarah walked on because her father owned a string of car dealerships. Sarah always treated my home like it was beneath her. Why on earth would her car be parked down my street at 5 in the morning? "Why would Sarah be here?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "That is exactly what you are going to find out," Mrs. Jenkins said. Her eyes narrowed. "Marcus is acting way too happy, Maya. I saw him practically dancing on the porch when he carried your bag out. Men do not get that excited to see their wives leave for 2 weeks unless they have a plan. You need to pretend you forgot your passport. Pay off that driver right now and tell him to leave. Then you sneak back in through the side garden door and hide in your master bathroom." My mind was racing. Hide in my own bathroom. It sounded completely insane. But Mrs. Jenkins had spent 30 years working in the county courthouse. She knew a liar when she saw one, and she knew when a situation was dangerously wrong. The churning feeling in my stomach intensified. Everything clicked into place. The sudden generosity, the expensive ticket, the absolute insistence that I completely disconnect from the world for 14 days. Marcus was clearing the board. He was getting me out of the way. I took a deep breath and nodded. I slipped out from behind the bushes and walked quickly up to the Uber driver. I handed him a crisp $100 bill through the open window. There has been a change of plans, I told him quietly. Please take my suitcase out of the trunk and leave. Keep the money for your trouble. The driver looked confused, but he did not argue. $100 was $100. He popped the trunk, and I hauled my heavy suitcase out, setting it on the sidewalk. He drove away down the street. I waited until the taillights disappeared before I grabbed the handle of my suitcase and dragged it back behind the thick hedges where Mrs. Jenkins was waiting. Leave the bag here with me, she whispered. Go through the side gate. The latch is still broken from the storm, so it will not make a sound. Get inside and do not make a single noise. I thanked her silently and crept along the side of the house. My heart pounded furiously against my ribs. I felt like a criminal trespassing on my own property. I reached the wooden side gate and pushed it open gently. It swung wide without a creak. I moved swiftly across the patio and reached the side door that led directly into the laundry room. I reached into my purse with shaking hands and pulled out my spare key. I slid it into the lock and turned it as slowly as humanly possible. The deadbolt clicked open. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The house was dead quiet. From the laundry room, I could see down the hallway toward the kitchen and the living room. I took off my shoes and left them on the rug. Walking in just my socks, I moved silently down the hall. Every floorboard felt like a potential landmine. I knew this house better than anyone. I knew exactly which steps creaked and which ones were safe. I glided past the kitchen and slipped into the master bedroom. The bed was unmade. Marcus' suit jacket was draped over the chair. I crossed the room and stepped into the ensuite bathroom. It was a large space with a walk-in shower and a heavy oak door. I pulled the door shut, leaving just a tiny crack open, so I could hear what was happening in the bedroom. I backed into the dark corner next to the shower stall and waited. The silence was deafening. My hands were shaking so badly I had to clench them into tight fists. Then I heard the front door unlock. The heavy oak front door clicked shut. I held my breath, pressing my back against the cold tile of the shower wall. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. They were not alone. I heard the sharp click-clack of high heels striking the hardwood floor. My stomach plummeted. Mrs. Jenkins was absolutely right. I reached into my pocket with trembling fingers and pulled out my phone. I swiped the screen opened the voice app, and tapped the red circle to record. The timer started ticking upward. 1 second, 2 seconds. The bedroom door pushed open with a loud creak. Is she finally gone? A high-pitched voice asked. It was Sarah. The sheer disdain in her tone was unmistakable. She is on her way to the port right now, Marcus replied. His voice was completely relaxed. He sounded like a man who had just taken off a heavy backpack. She thinks she is going to be sipping margaritas for 2 weeks. It was way too easy. I heard the rustle of clothing, and then the unmistakable sound of a deep, wet kiss. My heart stopped beating for a fraction of a second. My own husband, my own sister-in-law, in the bedroom my grandmother had built, in the bedroom I shared with him every single night. The brazenness made me want to vomit. God, this house always smells like cheap shea butter when she is here, Sarah sneered. I heard her heels pacing across the floorboards right outside the bathroom door. She needs to realize that nobody in our social circle mixes their own body lotion in a garage. It is incredibly embarrassing for David and me to even be associated with her. You really deserve so much better, Marcus. I know, baby, Marcus laughed. It was a cruel, callous laugh that I had never heard him use before. I am so tired of playing the supportive husband to a woman who refuses to elevate herself. My mother was right about her from day one, but do not worry about the smell. Once we renovate this place, we are tearing out these cheap floors and putting in marble. Renovate. My blood ran completely cold. This was not just a disgusting affair, this was something entirely different. All right, enough, celebrating Marcus said. His tone shifted to pure business. Go get the paperwork from your bag, we do not have all day. I need to get this filed at the bank before my afternoon meetings. I heard the heavy zipper of a leather tote bag opening. Paper rustled loudly in the quiet room. Are you absolutely sure this is going to work? Sarah asked. Her voice was slightly lower now, laced with a greedy kind of excitement. David has no idea I am doing this with you. If this blows up, he will completely lose his mind. It is foolproof, Marcus said confidently. I am the senior loan officer on this account. I approve the collaterals myself. The house is completely paid off and the market value has skyrocketed since her grandmother died. All I needed was her signature on the spousal consent form and the property deed transfer. And since she is currently on her way to international waters without any cell service, she will not be getting any alert calls from the fraud department, Sarah added with a wicked giggle. Exactly, Marcus replied. I heard the scratching sound of a pen moving rapidly across thick paper. Look at that. A perfect forgery. I have been practicing her handwriting for 3 months. By the time she gets back from the cruise, the $2 million loan will be fully disbursed into our offshore account. We let the bank foreclose on this dump, she gets evicted, and you and I finally buy that massive estate in the Hamptons. We can finally be together openly without the dead weight. The words hung in the air like a heavy, poisonous fog. $2 million. They were stealing the only tangible legacy my family had left in this world. My grandmother had scrubbed floors and worked double shifts at the hospital just to buy this land. She had fought against redlining and systemic racism just to secure a mortgage in this neighborhood 50 years ago. And now my own husband was handing it over to a greedy white woman who thought my existence was a stain on her social calendar. I leaned my head back against the tile. The sadness and the shock that had initially paralyzed me instantly evaporated. They were completely replaced by a blazing, white-hot fury. I was not going to cry. I was not going to break down. Marcus thought he was dealing with a naive woman who just mixed lotions for fun. He thought I was weak because I chose to be gentle with him. He had absolutely no idea who I truly was or what I had been quietly building behind his back. Sarah sighed. I cannot wait to see her face when the sheriff changes the locks, she said. It is going to be absolutely priceless. Do you think Cora will finally let me host the family Thanksgiving dinner this year once we have the Hamptons house? My mother already considers you the true lady of the family, Marcus replied. Papers shuffled loudly. She will disown David and make you her favorite child. Sign right here as the witness and we are done. I looked down at my phone. The recorder sat at exactly 4 minutes and 20 seconds. It was crystal clear audio of federal bank fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. I opened my messages and attached the file. I typed a simple 3-word message to my corporate lawyer. Execute Protocol B. I quickly hit send. The trap was set. I slid the phone back into my pocket. I rolled my shoulders back. I took one final and very deep breath. I reached out and wrapped my hand firmly around the brass doorknob. I turned the heavy brass doorknob and shoved the oak door open with enough force to make it slam against the bathroom wall. The loud bang echoed through the master bedroom like a gunshot. Marcus physically jumped, dropping the silver pen onto the expensive hardwood floor. Sarah screamed, clutching a bedsheet to her chest. They were both sitting on top of my grandmother's vintage quilt, surrounded by stacks of legal documents and bank folders. The sheer panic on their faces was absolutely priceless. Marcus scrambled backward, his eyes wide with disbelief, as if he were looking at a ghost. Are we celebrating early? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. I stepped out of the bathroom and crossed my arms over my chest. I thought we were supposed to wait until the bank foreclosed on this dump before popping the champagne. Marcus opened and closed his mouth repeatedly like a fish suffocating on dry land. Maya, he stammered, his face draining of all color. What are you doing here? You are supposed to be on your way to the port. The ship departs in 2 hours. I smiled, but there was absolutely no warmth in it. and miss the chance to see my husband and my sister-in-law execute a flawless act of federal bank fraud right on my own bed. I would not miss this for the world. Sarah recovered much faster than Marcus. She was used to manipulating her way out of trouble. She dropped the bedsheet and stood up, smoothing down her expensive silk blouse with completely fake confidence. She lifted her chin and looked down her nose at me using the exact same patronizing glare she used at every family holiday. "You are being completely hysterical," Sarah said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You obviously misheard us through the door. Marcus is simply helping me secure a commercial business loan for my boutique. David does not understand commercial real estate, so Marcus stepped in to help family. You are invading our privacy and jumping to insane conclusions." I let out a harsh laugh. "A commercial business loan? Is that what we are calling it now? I suppose you always practiced my signature for months just to secure a loan for your boutique." I pulled my phone out of my pocket and tapped the screen. I held it up so they could both see the audio file I had just recorded. I pressed play and cranked the volume to the maximum. Marcus' recorded voice filled the bedroom, bragging about how it was a perfect forgery and how the $2 million would go into their offshore account. Sarah's recorded voice giggled about seeing the sheriff change my locks. I stopped the playback and dropped the phone back into my pocket. Marcus' face had gone from pale to a sickly shade of green. He knew exactly what that recording meant for his career at the bank. He knew it meant automatic termination and a direct referral to federal authorities. But instead of apologizing or begging for forgiveness, Marcus did what weak men always do when they are cornered. He got aggressive. He stood up, puffing out his chest and pointing a shaking finger at my face. "You think you are so smart, Maya?" he shouted, his voice cracking slightly. "You think a little recording is going to save you? You are nothing without me. You sit in the garage mixing oils all day while I pay for your entire life. This house is legally half mine anyway since we are married. I have every right to leverage this asset to improve our financial standing." I stared at him, letting his profound ignorance hang in the air. He truly believed he owned half of my grandmother's house simply because he slept in it. He had never bothered to read the deed or understand property law. He was so blinded by his own arrogance and his desperate need to impress his wealthy white sister-in-law that he had not even done basic legal research. "You do not own a single brick of this house, Marcus," I said softly. "But please continue explaining how stealing $2 million in my name is actually a benefit to our marriage." Sarah scoffed, stepping closer to Marcus. "You are wasting your breath, Marcus," she said, shooting me a look of pure disgust. "She is just a bitter woman who cannot handle the fact that you need a real partner. Look at her. She is standing there in a cheap dress trying to threaten a bank executive. We should just call the police and have her removed for trespassing." "Trespassing in my own home," I challenged, taking a step toward her. "I would absolutely love for you to call the police, Sarah. Let us call them right now. We can give them the audio recording and the forged documents all at once. It will save the fraud department a lot of time." Marcus panicked visibly at the mention of the police. "No, nobody is calling the cops," he snapped, shooting a warning glare at Sarah. He ran his hands over his face, trying to regain control of the situation. He needed to reassert his dominance. He needed an audience that would automatically side with him and validate his terrible choices. He reached for his phone on the nightstand. "I am calling my mother," Marcus declared, his hands shaking as he unlocked the screen. "She knows exactly how unstable you have been lately, Maya. She will know exactly how to handle this. You are trying to destroy my career over a misunderstanding, and I will not allow it." I watched him dial his mother's number, feeling a very deep sense of twisted satisfaction. "Call her," I said, leaning against the wooden doorframe. "Call Cora and tell her to come over here right now. Let us have a full family reunion." He pressed the call button and the line began to ring loudly, echoing perfectly. The line clicked open after the third ring. "Oh, Marcus, my sweet boy." Cora answered, her voice dripping with that sickening maternal sweetness she reserved exclusively for him. "What is wrong? You sound so upset." "Mom, you need to get over here right now," Marcus said, his voice trembling with perfectly manufactured panic. Maya missed her cruise. She is having a complete mental breakdown. She is screaming about my bank loans and threatening to call the police on me and Sarah. Please hurry. She is acting completely unstable. I will be right there, Cora gasped. He hung up the phone and threw it onto the bed. He looked at me with a smug expression. You are going to regret this, Maya, he spat. My mother knows exactly how to handle your little tantrums. Cora only lived 10 minutes away. The wait was incredibly tense. Sarah spent the time hurriedly shoving the forged legal documents back into her expensive leather tote bag. She refused to make eye contact with me. Marcus paced back and forth across the bedroom floor, muttering under his breath about how I was trying to ruin his pristine reputation. I did not say a single word. I simply stood by the door and watched them unravel. I felt an incredible sense of clarity. Every lingering doubt I had about my marriage was completely gone. The front door burst open downstairs. Heavy footsteps pounded up the wooden staircase. Cora marched into the master bedroom like a general entering a war zone. She was a tall, imposing woman who always wore her Sunday church clothes no matter the day of the week. Today she was wearing a sharp navy blue suit and her signature pearl necklace. She took one look at the room and immediately rushed over to Marcus, pulling him into a tight embrace. "Oh, my poor boy," Cora cried, stroking his back. She turned her head and glared at me with absolute venom. "What is wrong with you, Maya? How dare you threaten my son in his own home?" "And poor Sarah," she added, reaching out to pat Sarah on the arm. "You must be terrified." I stared at her in sheer disbelief. "Did he mention why I was threatening him, Cora?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Did he happen to mention that I found him in my bed with your other daughter-in-law? Did he mention they were forging my signature to steal a $2 million loan against my grandmother's house?" Cora waved her hand dismissively, cutting me off before I could even finish. "Do not be ridiculous, Maya," she snapped. "Marcus is a senior executive at a major bank. He handles complex financial matters every single day. If he needs to leverage this outdated property to secure a better future for his family, then you should be on your knees thanking him." "Thanking him," I repeated, feeling a cold laugh rise in my chest. "He is committing federal fraud." Cora took a step toward me, her eyes narrowing into dark slits. "You listen to me very carefully," she warned. "Sarah comes from a prominent family. Her father is a highly respected businessman. She is helping Marcus elevate his social status and build vital connections at the bank." "What exactly do you do, Maya?" "You sit in a dirty garage making cheap lotions. You are a 33-year-old failure who has done nothing but drag my brilliant son down since the day you married him." Sarah stood behind Cora, smiling a wicked, triumphant smile. She loved having the ultimate matriarch fighting her battles. "Men have needs, Maya." Cora continued, her voice cold and relentless. "If you were a better wife, maybe he would not have to look elsewhere for support and companionship. But since you clearly cannot handle the responsibilities of a high-class marriage, you need to leave. Hand over the keys to this house right now. I will not allow you to embarrass our family at church this Sunday with your ridiculous accusations." I looked at the three of them standing together. They were a perfect portrait of toxic delusion. They honestly believed their own lies. They believed that status and appearance excused the most vile betrayals imaginable. Marcus stood tall behind his mother, looking incredibly proud of himself. He thought he had won. He thought that by freezing our joint checking accounts and using his mother as a human shield, he had completely neutralized me. "You have $0, Maya," Marcus chimed in, stepping out from behind Cora. "I froze our joint accounts this morning. You have no money for a lawyer. You have no way to fight this. Just pack your cheap clothes and walk away before I decide to press charges against you for harassment." He was so incredibly confident. He had absolutely no idea that the joint account he froze was just the account I used to buy groceries and pay the electric bill. He had no idea about the massive empire I had built entirely under the radar. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply nodded slowly. I reached into my purse and pulled out the heavy brass key to the front door. I tossed it onto the bed where it landed right next to the spot where they had been forging my signature. "You are absolutely right, Cora," I said softly. "I cannot compete with this level of class. You all deserve each other." I turned around and walked out of the master bedroom. I walked down the long wooden staircase for the last time. Marcus followed me to the top of the stairs, laughing loudly. "Take your suitcase and walk, Maya," he shouted down at me. I stopped at the front door and looked up at him. I smiled. "Keep the house warm for me, Marcus," I called out. "And remember to check your mailbox. You just violated the Federal Bank Fraud Act. The penalties are very severe." I stepped onto the concrete porch, pulling the heavy front door shut behind me with a loud thud. Marcus' laughing echoed through the wood, but it sounded hollow. He tried projecting strength, but I knew he was terrified. I walked toward the sidewalk. The morning sun illuminated the manicured lawns. I could feel the eyes of the street on me. This was exactly the public spectacle Cora despised. The front door swung open again. Cora marched out onto the porch with Marcus and Sarah standing right behind her like obedient soldiers. She gripped the wooden railing tightly, her knuckles turning white. "Do not think you can walk away and spin this story to the church congregation, Maya," Cora shouted, her voice carrying across the street. "Everyone knows how hard Marcus worked to provide for you. You are just a bitter woman who could never appreciate a successful man. You stay away from our family. Sarah is the true blessing in this household, and we will not let your jealousy ruin it." I turned around. My silence was entirely more powerful than her frantic yelling. I looked at Sarah, who was smirking triumphantly while clinging to Marcus' arm. She looked so incredibly proud of herself for destroying a marriage and stealing a house. Marcus stepped forward, puffing his chest out. "I meant what I said. Maya," he yelled. "I froze the joint checking accounts this morning. You have $0 to your name. You are completely locked out of my financial ecosystem. Just keep walking and do not come back. If you step foot on this property again, I will have you arrested." I simply smiled at him. His financial ecosystem. He was incredibly arrogant. He honestly believed the joint account containing $3,000 of grocery money was my entire wealth. He had no idea that while he was busy buying flashy watches to impress his sister-in-law, I was quietly building a massive corporate entity. M Beauty was not a little lotion hobby. It was a thriving organic cosmetics brand that just finalized a $45 million distribution deal with Sephora. The money he froze was pocket change. "Where are you going to go anyway?" Sarah called out mockingly. "Are you going to go sleep in that dirty garage where you mix your little oils? Oh wait, you cannot even do that anymore because the garage belongs to us now." I did not bother answering her. I turned my attention toward the thick privacy hedges near the edge of the property. Mrs. Jenkins was standing there holding the handle of my heavy suitcase. She had heard every single word of the screaming match. She gave me a sharp nod of approval. She knew exactly what I was doing. I walked over to her and took the suitcase from her hands. "Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins," I said quietly. "I really owe you one." "You owe me a front row seat when the feds show up," she whispered back, a fierce grin spreading across her wrinkled face. "You go take care of business, Maya. I will keep an eye on these fools for you." At that exact moment, a sleek black SUV glided smoothly down the street. It was not an Uber. It was a private executive transport vehicle sent by my wealth management firm. The car pulled up to the curb right in front of my house. A driver in a sharp black suit stepped out of the vehicle. He walked around to the back, opened the trunk, and gently lifted my heavy suitcase inside. Then he walked over to the rear passenger door and opened it for me, standing respectfully to the side. Up on the porch, the toxic trio went completely silent. Marcus lowered his pointing finger. Cora dropped her hand from the railing. Sarah squinted her eyes, staring at the luxury vehicle in pure confusion. This did not fit their narrative at all. A broke 33-year-old failure who just had her checking account frozen does not get picked up by a private chauffeur. "Who is that?" Marcus demanded, his voice losing all its previous confidence. "Who is paying for that car, Maya?" I placed my hand on the open door of the SUV and looked back at them. "Enjoy the house, Marcus," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the crisp morning air. I slid into the plush leather seat and the driver closed the door firmly behind me, shutting out the sight of my treacherous husband, my cruel mother-in-law, and the woman who thought she could steal my life. The car interior was cool and completely silent. The driver got behind the wheel and pulled smoothly away from the curb. I watched through the dark tinted glass as the three of them stood frozen on the front porch, staring after the car, until we turned the corner and disappeared from sight. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I dialed my corporate lawyer immediately. He answered on the first ring. "Protocol B is initiated, Maya," he said briskly. "I received the audio file. It is incredibly damning." "Good," I replied, leaning back against the comfortable leather headrest. "Marcus and Sarah just forged my signature on a $2 million collateral loan document. They are planning to file it with his bank this afternoon. I want you to let them submit it. Let the crime be fully completed on paper. Then I want you to contact the FBI White-Collar Crime Division." "It will be done," my lawyer said. "And what about the property deed?" "The property was transferred into my irrevocable trust 8 months ago," I reminded him. "They are trying to borrow against a house I do not even legally own as an individual anymore. Let them dig their own graves." The car sped toward the downtown corporate district. I was not a victim crying in the back seat. I was a CEO preparing for war. The car sped toward the downtown corporate district. I was not a victim crying in the back seat. I was a CEO preparing for war. Within 20 minutes, the black SUV pulled into the secure underground parking garage of a gleaming high-rise building of glass and steel. This was the headquarters of M Beauty. My driver opened the door, and I stepped out into the brightly lit concrete cavern, taking the private elevator directly to the top floor. The doors slid open to reveal a massive reception area, decorated in sleek, minimalist tones of cream and gold. My executive assistant stood up immediately as I walked through the double glass doors. I asked her to cancel all my standard meetings for the day and bring my legal team into the main conference room. I walked into my corner office, dropping my purse onto the custom marble desk. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the entire city skyline. This was the empire Marcus thought was just a little garage hobby. My corporate attorney, Mr. Sterling, walked into the office a few minutes later carrying a thick, leather briefcase. He was a ruthless former prosecutor who handled all my corporate contracts and asset protection. He sat across from me, opening his laptop with practiced efficiency. We reviewed the audio file I had captured in the bathroom. Sterling confirmed that the recording was perfectly clear and undeniably established both intent and execution of federal wire fraud. He had already forwarded the file to his contacts at the Federal Bureau of Investigation, White-Collar Crime Division. Because Marcus was attempting to defraud a federally insured banking institution, the penalties were exponentially more severe than standard theft. Sterling explained that the bank would process the forged paperwork by this afternoon, triggering an automatic flag in the Federal Registry due to the property being held in an irrevocable trust. We were not just stopping a loan, we were setting off a federal trap that Marcus could never escape. As Sterling finalized the legal filings, I opened a separate program on my laptop. 3 months ago, I had noticed several expensive batches of organic ingredients missing from my garage laboratory. Assuming Marcus was quietly pawning them to fund his lavish lifestyle, I had an elite security firm install discreet micro cameras in key areas of the house. I never expected those cameras to become my ultimate weapon. I clicked the application open, and the screen populated with high-definition video feeds from my former living room kitchen and dining area. I turned the laptop slightly so Sterling could see the screen. We watched in silent fascination as my husband and my sister-in-law immediately began celebrating their imagined victory. The live feed showed Sarah strutting through the living room wearing one of my expensive silk robes that she had brazenly pulled from my closet. She was holding a glass of my premium champagne, laughing loudly as Marcus spun her around the kitchen island. They were entirely convinced that they had outsmarted me. I watched Marcus pull out his phone and start making calls. According to the audio picked up by the kitchen camera, he was ordering a last-minute catered dinner from the most expensive private chef in the city. He was inviting all their superficial country club friends over to celebrate his new business venture. It was sickening to watch them parade around the home my grandmother built. treating it like a conquered territory. They had no respect for the history of that house or the blood, sweat, and tears it took to maintain it. By early evening, the house was completely transformed. The live feed showed the dining room packed with their elitist friends. Sarah had changed into a tight designer dress, playing the role of the perfect high society hostess. She was practically floating around the room, refilling glasses and bragging about the massive renovations she planned to make. I watched her point directly at my grandmother's antique chandelier and tell a guest that it was hideous and would be the first thing thrown into the dumpster. Marcus was holding court by the fireplace, smoking a cigar, and accepting congratulations from his bank colleagues. He was actively telling them that he had finally pushed me out of the picture because I refused to support his career ambitions. He painted himself as the long-suffering husband who was finally taking control of his financial destiny. But the facade began to crack right in front of their wealthy guests. I watched the dining room camera as a young female server walked past Sarah, holding a silver tray of red wine. Sarah suddenly stepped backward, bumping hard into the server. The tray tilted sharply, and 3 full glasses of dark red wine spilled directly down the front of Sarah's pristine designer dress. Sarah let out a piercing shriek, silencing the entire room. Instead of handling the situation gracefully, Sarah turned into a complete monster. She started screaming at the young woman, calling her stupid and incompetent. She demanded that the catering company pay for the dress. The server did not cower. She stood her ground. Looking Sarah directly in the eye, the audio picked up her voice perfectly clear. The server calmly stated that she knew exactly who really owned this house. She mentioned that her mother bought organic lotions from the brilliant woman who lived here, and she knew Sarah was nothing but a cheap imposter playing dress up in another woman's home. The server untied her apron, threw it onto the hardwood floor, and walked out the front door, leaving Sarah totally humiliated. The wealthy guests stared at Sarah in stunned silence. Marcus rushed over to do damage control, but the elegant dinner party was already ruined. The seed of doubt had been planted. Watching the scene, I felt profound justice. They were beginning to destroy themselves. The first domino had officially fallen. I told Sterling to prepare the lawsuits. The heavy oak front door clicked shut behind the departing server, leaving a suffocating silence in the dining room. The wealthy guests sat perfectly still, staring at the puddle of expensive red wine soaking into the vintage Persian rug. Sarah stood at the head of the table, her face flushed dark crimson underneath her ruined designer dress. She let out a forced, high-pitched laugh, attempting to shatter the unbearable tension. "Good riddance to incompetent help," Sarah announced loudly, waving her hand dismissively. She was completely jealous and clearly unstable. "I will be right back, everyone. Please continue enjoying the appetizers." Sarah marched up the staircase, leaving wet red footprints. Marcus was left standing alone, facing a table full of elite bank executives who suddenly looked extremely uncomfortable. The man sitting to his right was Richard, a senior vice president at the bank. Richard cleared his throat and set his crystal wine glass down. "That was quite a scene," Marcus Richard said, his voice carefully measured. "The girl mentioned something about the real owner of this house. I thought you said you and your wife were co-owners." Marcus felt a cold bead of sweat roll down his neck. He forced a confident smile and grabbed a fresh bottle of wine to refill Richard's glass. "Do not listen to the hired help," Marcus chuckled nervously, wiping his sweating palms. "My wife Maya has been having severe mental health struggles. She tells wild stories to anyone. She runs a little lotion mixing hobby out of the garage, and it detached her from reality. We are transitioning the property fully into my name to protect our assets." Richard raised a gray eyebrow. "A little lotion mixing hobby," he repeated slowly. His tone was skeptical. "My daughter buys organic skincare from a local brand based in this neighborhood called M Beauty. I heard the founder secured a massive national distribution contract worth tens of millions of dollars. You are not telling me your wife is the founder of M Beauty, are you?" The dining room instantly dropped 10 degrees. Marcus stared at Richard, his mind racing frantically. He remembered the endless boxes of organic shea butter. He remembered the sleek black SUV that picked Maya up that morning. He remembered how calm she looked when he threatened to freeze their joint checking account. A terrifying wave of paranoia crashed over him. "No," Marcus stammered, his voice cracking slightly. "That is completely different. Maya just mixes cheap oils. It is nothing like that." The seed of doubt had firmly planted itself in Marcus' brain. The room suddenly felt incredibly small. He looked around at the antique furniture and the crystal chandeliers. For the first time, he realized he had no idea how Maya afforded to maintain this house while supposedly making zero money. Sarah came back downstairs, changed into one of my tailored suits from the master closet. It did not fit her properly, but she strutted into the room anyway, acting like she owned the world. "Let us open the champagne," Sarah cheered, clapping her hands together. But the celebratory mood was dead. The guests exchanged awkward glances. Richard stood up and politely excused himself, citing an early morning golf tournament. The rest of the guests followed his lead, making thin excuses. Within 15 minutes, the dining room was entirely empty except for Marcus and Sarah. Sarah was furious. She slammed her champagne glass down onto the table, shattering the fragile crystal stem. "What is wrong with your snobby friends, Marcus?" she yelled, kicking the leg of the table. "They ruined my entire victory dinner." Marcus did not answer her. He walked over to the bay window and peered out into the dark street. The neighborhood was completely quiet, but he felt an overwhelming sensation that he was being watched. He looked across the street and saw Mrs. Jenkins standing on her front porch, holding a cup of tea, staring directly at my house. Even in the pitch-black night, she did not wave, she just stared. The catering manager walked into the dining room, interrupting Sarah's tantrum. He carried a leather binder, looking unimpressed by the scene. "Since the dinner concluded early, we will need the final payment now," the manager said, extending the binder toward Marcus. "And there will be a $2,000 surcharge for the hostile work environment my staff endured tonight." Marcus gritted his teeth and pulled out his gold credit card, handing it over proudly. "Put it on there," he snapped. Sarah poured herself another drink, muttering about how she could not wait to bulldoze the entire property. A moment later, the manager returned, holding the gold card with 2 fingers. His expression was entirely blank. "I am sorry, sir, but this card has been declined," he said smoothly. "Do you have an alternative method of payment?" "Declined," Marcus shouted, snatching the card back. "That is impossible. I am a senior loan officer at the issuing bank." "Run it again." "I ran it 3 times, sir," the manager replied calmly. "The bank placed an immediate fraud lock on all your personal accounts approximately an hour ago. If you cannot provide payment, we will involve the authorities." Marcus felt the floor drop out from underneath him. His personal accounts were locked. He pulled his phone out with trembling hands, opening his banking app. A bright red banner flashed, indicating a federal freeze on his assets. The paranoia he felt earlier blossomed into full-blown panic. Maya had not just walked away, she had completely isolated him. Sarah looked at Marcus, her anger shifting into confusion as she watched his face turn ash. "What is going on, Marcus?" Sarah demanded, stepping toward him. "Why is your card declining?" Marcus looked up, his eyes wide with genuine terror. He finally realized the horrifying truth. They had not backed Maya into a corner. She meticulously lured them into a trap, and the trap had just snapped shut. The morning sun brought no relief to Marcus. He spent the entire night pacing the antique Persian rug while Sarah slept in my bed. The glowing notification on his banking app burned into his retinas. A federal freeze was not a clerical error. It was a blazing siren. But Marcus' ego was too large to accept defeat. As light crept through the shutters, his panic morphed into resolve. He convinced himself I was playing a legal game. He decided his only escape route was to get to the bank immediately and force the $2 million collateral loan through the system. Once the offshore account was funded, he could hire the best attorneys and crush my resistance. He splashed water on his face and put on his tailored suit. He needed to project authority. Sarah wandered downstairs, wrapped tightly in my silk robe, holding an espresso. She was oblivious to the guillotine hanging over their heads. She smiled, telling him to hurry home after work so they could interview interior decorators for the remodel. Marcus forced a smile, grabbed his briefcase filled with forged documents, and reached for the door handle. Before he could even turn the brass knob, a deafening mechanical roar shattered the quiet suburban morning. The heavy rumble of a large diesel engine vibrated through the floorboards. A loud hydraulic hissing sound immediately followed by the aggressive beep of a commercial vehicle reversing. Marcus pulled the door open and froze on the porch. A massive, heavy-duty tow truck was backing aggressively up our pristine concrete driveway. The rusted metal arm of the truck was already lowering directly toward the front bumper of Sarah's gleaming white luxury Range Rover. Sarah pushed past Marcus, spilling her espresso onto the hardwood floor. She stood frozen in the doorway for a split second, before a loud metallic clank echoed through the air. The tow truck operator had expertly hooked the front axle of the Range Rover. "Hey, Sarah," screamed her voice cracking with pure hysteria. "What do you think you are doing? Get away from my vehicle right now." She sprinted down the porch steps, barefoot, still wearing my silk robe. Marcus stood completely paralyzed by the sheer embarrassment of the situation. The tow truck driver, a burly man wearing a high-visibility vest and chewing a thick piece of gum, barely even looked at her. He pulled a crumpled clipboard from his passenger seat and stepped down onto the driveway. "Are you Sarah?" he asked in a bored, monotone voice. "Yes, I am Sarah," she shrieked, throwing her hands up in the air. "My father is a very prominent businessman in this city. You are making a massive mistake. Unhook my car this instant before I call the police and have you arrested for grand theft auto." The driver let out a dry, raspy laugh. "Go ahead and call the cops, lady," he said, tapping a thick pen against his clipboard. "The finance company has been looking for this car for 3 solid months. You have ignored every single phone call and default notice. This vehicle is officially bank property now. I am just doing my job." Sarah's face turned an ugly shade of purple. "You are lying," she screamed, completely losing whatever refined upper-class persona she had left. "My husband David handles those payments. The bank made an administrative error. I am an elite customer." The driver ignored her entirely and walked over to the side of the truck, pulling a heavy metal lever. The hydraulic winch whined loudly, lifting the front tires of the expensive Range Rover off the concrete. Sarah lunged forward, trying to physically block the truck door, but the driver easily sidestepped her. The commotion was incredibly loud. Doors began opening all up and down the quiet suburban street. Neighbors stepped out onto their front porches in their bathrobes, clutching coffee mugs to watch the free entertainment. But nobody was enjoying the show quite as much as Mrs. Jenkins. She stood on her front porch, leaning casually against her wooden railing, holding her favorite floral teacup. "Well, would you look at that?" Mrs. Jenkins yelled across the street, her voice carrying perfectly over the noise of the diesel engine. "The high-class lady from the country club cannot even pay her car note. I guess selling your dignity does not pay as well as it used to." Sarah whipped her head around, her eyes blazing with fury. "Shut your mouth, you crazy old bat!" Sarah yelled back, pointing a shaking finger at Mrs. Jenkins. Mrs. Jenkins just laughed, taking a slow, deliberate sip of her tea. "At least I own my car, honey," Mrs. Jenkins called back cheerfully. "It sure is a shame to see high-class trash stinking up such a beautiful neighborhood. I wonder what the church congregation is going to say about this." Marcus felt his chest tighten with anxiety. The public humiliation was unbearable for him. His wealthy neighbors, the people he spent years trying to impress, were currently watching his new lover scream barefoot in a driveway while her car was legally repossessed. This completely shattered his flawless aristocratic image. He looked down at the forged legal documents in his briefcase. If he stayed on that porch, his hard-earned reputation would be permanently destroyed. He could not afford to be associated with this kind of public trashiness. He needed the $2 million more than he needed Sarah. Without saying a word to comfort her, Marcus slipped quietly through the side gate. He jogged down the alleyway to his parked luxury sedan, abandoning Sarah to face the angry neighborhood alone. He threw his briefcase into the passenger seat and started the engine, his hands shaking violently against the steering wheel. He peeled out of the alleyway, speeding toward the downtown financial district. He was convinced that the forged loan was his absolute salvation. He had no idea he was driving straight into a federal brick wall. He pulled his luxury sedan into the private executive parking garage beneath the towering glass facade of the downtown bank building. He grabbed his leather briefcase from the passenger seat and took a deep breath. He adjusted his expensive silk tie in the rearview mirror. The humiliation of the morning faded as the sterile corporate air conditioning hit his face in the elevator. Here in this building, he was not the embarrassed husband of a screaming woman in a bathrobe. He was a senior loan officer. He was a man of immense power and financial authority. He walked onto the executive floor with his chest puffed out and a confident stride. He smiled at the receptionist and walked straight toward the massive corner office belonging to his regional manager, Mr. Henderson. Marcus knocked twice on the heavy mahogany door and pushed it open without waiting for an answer. That was how confident he felt. Henderson was sitting behind his massive desk, staring intently at his computer monitor. "Good morning, sir," Marcus said, projecting his best corporate voice. "I have the final paperwork for the collateral loan on my residential property. I just need your final executive signature to release the $2 million wire transfer to my holding account." Henderson did not look up immediately. He slowly took off his reading glasses and placed them delicately on the wooden desk. His face was completely devoid of its usual friendly warmth. His eyes were cold and piercing. "Shut the door, Marcus," he said in a low, dangerous tone. Marcus felt a tiny prickle of unease, but he pushed it down. He closed the heavy door behind him and walked over to the desk, opening his leather briefcase. He pulled out the thick stack of forged legal documents and placed them perfectly in the center of the desk. "This is a massive win for my portfolio," Marcus said, tapping the top of the file. "The property appraisal came back incredibly high, and the loan-to-value ratio is flawless." Henderson stared at the file for a long, agonizing moment. Then, with a sudden, violent motion, he swept his arm across the desk. The thick stack of forged documents flew through the air and scattered violently across the carpeted floor. Marcus jumped back, his heart hammering against his ribs. "What are you doing?" Marcus shouted, staring at the scattered papers in absolute shock. Henderson stood up from his leather chair and leaned heavily over the desk. "You arrogant fool!" Henderson growled, his voice vibrating with barely contained rage. "Do you really think I am going to sign off on a $2 million wire transfer for a property you do not even legally own?" Marcus froze. The corporate air conditioning suddenly felt like freezing winter wind. "What are you talking about?" Marcus stammered, taking a step backward. "My wife signed the spousal consent forms this morning. The deed is completely clear. I ran the title search myself last week." "You ran a preliminary search on an outdated internal database," Henderson snapped, pointing a thick finger at Marcus. "If you had checked the county registry this morning, you would have seen the massive red flag waving over this entire property. Your wife, Maya, does not own that house, Marcus. She transferred the entire deed into a federally protected, irrevocable trust exactly 8 months ago. The house belongs to a corporate entity now. You have absolutely no legal claim to it, and neither does she as an individual." Marcus felt the room begin to spin. 8 months ago. That meant Maya had been planning this for almost a year. She had quietly restructured her entire financial existence while he was busy mocking her lotion business. He tried to speak, but his throat was completely dry. "But the signature," he whispered, staring down at the forged papers on the floor. "I have her signature right there." Henderson let out a dark, humorless laugh. "That is the worst part of this entire disaster, Marcus. 10 minutes before you walked into this office, I received a direct phone call from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, White-Collar Crime Division. They just placed an active federal freeze on the deed of that property due to an ongoing criminal investigation into forged signatures and wire fraud." Marcus felt his knees buckle slightly. He reached out and grabbed the back of a leather guest chair to keep himself from collapsing onto the floor. "The feds," he choked out. The feds are investigating this. They are not just investigating the property, Henderson said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. They are investigating you, Marcus. They sent over an audio file recorded inside your own house this morning. I heard you and your sister-in-law plotting to defraud this federally insured banking institution. I heard you bragging about forging a signature to steal $2 million. Marcus could not breathe. The audio file. Maya had not just walked away. She had recorded them in the bedroom. She had handed him over to the federal government on a silver platter. I can explain. Marcus pleaded, his voice high and desperate. It was a misunderstanding. She is trying to ruin me because of a marital dispute. You have to believe me, sir. I have been a loyal employee here for 10 years. Henderson shook his head slowly, looking at Marcus with absolute disgust. Loyalty does not cover federal felonies, Marcus. You have compromised the integrity of this entire bank. I am suspending you immediately pending a full federal investigation. You are stripped of all your banking credentials. Leave your company phone and laptop on that desk. Your access badges have already been deactivated. When you walk out of this building, you are no longer an employee of this institution. You are a federal suspect. 2 large security guards stepped into the office, grabbing Marcus by his arms. He stared at the forged papers on the floor, realizing his entire life was completely over. Marcus stumbled out of the massive glass doors of the bank building. The hot midday sun hit him like a physical blow. He felt entirely numb. The 2 security guards had escorted him through the lobby like a common criminal. His colleagues had watched from their desks, whispering to each other. His pristine reputation, built over 10 years, was completely destroyed in less than 10 minutes. He walked blindly toward the parking garage, clutching nothing but his personal car keys. His corporate phone and laptop were gone. He was entirely cut off from the financial world he worshipped. He climbed into his luxury sedan and locked the doors. His hands shook so violently he could barely press the start button. He pulled out his personal cell phone. He needed answers. He needed to understand how the broke woman he left in a cheap dress this morning had managed to orchestrate a federal trap. He opened the internet browser on his phone. His fingers fumbled across the screen as he typed Maya's name into the search bar. He hit enter and waited. The search results loaded instantly. Marcus' heart stopped beating. The first link was not a social media profile or a local neighborhood directory. It was a massive feature article from Forbes magazine, published just 2 days ago. The headline screamed across the screen. The Quiet Rise of M Beauty, how founder Maya turned a garage hobby into a $45 million empire. Marcus stared at the screen, unable to comprehend the words. $45 million. He clicked the link and the page opened to a high-resolution photograph of Maya. She was wearing a stunning tailored designer suit, standing confidently in front of a sleek corporate headquarters. She looked incredibly powerful. She looked nothing like the woman he had belittled at the steakhouse last night. Marcus read the article, his breathing growing shallow. The piece detailed how Maya had quietly bootstrapped M Beauty over the last 3 years. She had sourced rare organic ingredients and built a massive loyal customer base online. The article explained that she had purposefully kept her operations entirely under the radar until she finalized an exclusive national distribution contract with Sephora. The deal was officially signed last week. Marcus' mind raced. Last week? That was exactly when he was busy complaining about the electric bill and plotting to steal her house. The article mentioned that Maya had placed all her personal assets, including her primary residence, into an irrevocable trust to protect her newly acquired wealth from predatory liabilities. Predatory liabilities. That was him. She had anticipated his greed months before he even executed his pathetic plan. He scrolled down further, reading a quote from Maya herself. "I believe in quiet execution," Maya had told the interviewer. "True power does not need to announce itself at dinner parties. It simply builds an empire while others are busy showing off their watches." Marcus looked down at his expensive gold watch. It suddenly looked incredibly cheap and meaningless. He had frozen their joint checking account this morning, feeling like a financial god. He thought he was cutting off her entire lifeline. The crushing realization hit him like a freight train. That joint account held $3,000. It was just her grocery money. She probably spent more than that on a single corporate lunch. He had thrown away a life of unimaginable wealth and security. He could have been the husband of a multi-million-dollar CEO. He could have lived in real luxury without ever having to forge a single document. Instead, he had chosen Sarah. Sarah! The name tasted like acid in his mouth. He had risked federal prison for a woman whose car was just repossessed in his driveway. Sarah was not wealthy. She was drowning in debt, living entirely off her father's credit cards and David bank account. She was a complete fraud playing a high society character. And Marcus had sacrificed a literal $45 million empire for a broke, manipulative imposter. Panic surged through him. He needed to fix this. He needed to talk to Maya. He needed to convince her that Sarah had manipulated him. He could play the victim. He could tell Maya he was under immense stress and made a terrible mistake. He quickly dialed her number. The phone did not even ring. It went straight to an automated carrier message. The number you have reached has been disconnected or is no longer in service. She had completely blocked his number. She had severed his access entirely. Marcus slammed his fists against the steering wheel, screaming in absolute frustration. He threw his phone against the passenger seat. He was completely trapped. He had no job. He had no access to the massive wealth his wife possessed. He had federal agents building a criminal case against him. And he had a broke, demanding mistress waiting for him in a house he did not own. He started the car and peeled out of the parking garage, driving recklessly back toward the suburbs. He needed to confront Sarah. He needed to blame someone for this total catastrophe. He pulled onto his street and saw that the tow truck was gone. Sarah's Range Rover was gone. The driveway was empty. He parked his car and stormed up the front porch steps. He pushed the heavy oak door open. The house was dead quiet. The remnants of Sarah's spilled espresso were still sticky on the hardwood floor. Sarah, he roared, his voice echoing through the empty hallway. Where are you? He marched into the living room. Sarah was sitting on the expensive leather sofa, clutching a throw pillow to her chest. Her eyes were red and puffy. She looked up at him, her face completely devoid of its usual arrogant sneer. They took my car. Marcus, she whispered, her voice trembling. They towed it right in front of the entire neighborhood. That old lady across the street laughed at me. You just ran away. You left me there. Marcus stared at her, feeling absolutely zero sympathy. He walked over and stood directly over her, his face twisted in pure rage. You think your repossessed car is a problem? He yelled, spittle flying from his lips. You are a complete fraud, Sarah. You told me you had money. You told me you were high class. I do have money, she screamed back, standing up defensively. David handles the bills. It was just a misunderstanding. David is going to divorce you, Marcus laughed harshly. Because there is no money, and there is no $2 million loan either. The bank denied it. The feds are investigating us for wire fraud. I just lost my job and my entire career because of your stupid plan. Sarah's face went completely white. She dropped the throw pillow. What do you mean, the feds? She asked, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. I mean, we are going to prison, Marcus yelled, stepping closer. Maya set us up. She does not just make cheap lotion. She owns a $45 million company. She put this house in a trust months ago. She recorded us in the bedroom and sent it to the FBI. Sarah stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the coffee table. $45 million. She repeated, her eyes wide with shock. She looked around the living room as if seeing it for the first time. We tried to steal from a multimillionaire. We tried to steal and we failed. Marcus spat. And now I have absolutely nothing left. He turned away from her, pacing the floor. He needed a lawyer. He needed money for a defense fund. He looked back at Sarah, realizing she was completely useless to him now. She was just an anchor dragging him down into the abyss. You are nothing but a gold-digging parasite, Marcus snarled, his voice dropping to a vicious octave. You played my mother, you played my brother, and you tried to play me. But you have absolutely nothing. You are a broke, pathetic joke wearing my wife clothes. Sarah stopped crying instantly. The tears vanished as if someone had flipped a switch. Her face hardened into a mask of pure, cold calculation. She stood up straight, smoothing out the wrinkles in my silk robe. She looked at Marcus with absolute disgust. You think I actually wanted you? Sarah laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed in the large living room. Look at yourself, Marcus. You are a weak, pathetic little man who spent his entire life begging for his mother's approval. I only slept with you because you told me you controlled this massive estate. You told me you were a senior executive making millions. I thought I was upgrading. I thought you had the capital to pay off my boutique debts and buy me the Hamptons house. If I knew you were just a glorified bank teller living off his wife lotion money, I would never have let you touch me. Marcus' face flushed dark red with humiliation and rage. You manipulative witch, he spat, taking a threatening step toward her. You ruined my life. I am going to tell David everything. I am going to tell him you have been sleeping with me for months and drowning his accounts in debt. You do not have to tell him anything. A deep voice echoed from the front hallway. Marcus and Sarah both froze, completely paralyzed by the sound. The heavy oak front door had been left wide open when Marcus stormed inside. Standing in the foyer, clutching a stack of mail, was David. He was Marcus' older brother, the golden child Cora constantly praised. David was taller and broader than Marcus, wearing his standard casual Friday work attire. His face was completely drained of color. His hands shook so badly that the mail slipped from his fingers, scattering across the hardwood floor. David, Marcus stammered, taking a quick step backward away from Sarah. How long have you been standing there? Long enough, David said, his voice eerily quiet. He stepped into the living room, his eyes darting between his brother and his wife. He looked at the silk robe Sarah was wearing. He looked at the empty champagne glasses on the coffee table. I left work early because the finance company called me. David continued, his voice shaking with barely contained fury. They told me Sarah Range Rover was repossessed from this exact address. I came here to find out what was going on, and instead I find out my wife is sleeping with my own brother to pay off her hidden debts. David, please, Sarah cried out instantly, switching back to her helpless victim persona. She ran toward him, reaching out to grab his arm. Marcus forced me. He manipulated me. He told me he would help save my business if I spent time with him. Do not touch me! David roared violently, shoving her hands away. Sarah stumbled backward, falling onto the expensive leather sofa. David turned his burning gaze onto Marcus. You slept with my wife in my house, David yelled, stepping closer to Marcus. You forged documents. I heard you screaming about the feds and a $2 million loan. What kind of insane criminal disaster have you dragged my family into, Marcus? Marcus held his hands up defensively, backing away until his shoulders hit the brick fireplace. It was not my idea, David Marcus pleaded, his voice high and frantic. She seduced me. She manipulated my finances. Maya set us up to take the fall. We can fix this if we just stick together. We are brothers, David. Mom will know what to do. The mention of their mother snapped the last thread of David's patience. You pathetic coward, David spat. You always hide behind Mom. You always ruin everything and expect everyone else to clean up your mess. But you are not walking away from this one. David lunged forward with terrifying speed. He grabbed Marcus by the collar of his expensive tailored suit and slammed him hard against the brick fireplace. The impact knocked the wind completely out of Marcus. A framed photograph of Marcus and me crashed to the floor, shattering into 100 sharp pieces. Get off me, Marcus screamed, swinging his fist wildly. His knuckles connected with David's jaw with a loud, sickening crack. David stumbled back for a fraction of a second before roaring in pain and anger. He tackled Marcus around the waist, driving him into the heavy glass coffee table. The glass shattered instantly, sending dangerous shards flying across the living room rug. The two brothers rolled across the floor, punching and tearing at each other like wild animals. Years of deep-seated jealousy, resentment, and maternal favoritism completely exploded in a violent, bloody brawl. Marcus punched David in the ribs, but David was significantly stronger. He pinned Marcus to the floor and delivered a brutal punch directly to Marcus' nose. Blood exploded from Marcus' face, splattering across my ruined vintage rug. "Stop it!" Sarah screamed, standing on the sofa and covering her ears. "You are ruining everything! You are acting like animals!" David grabbed Marcus by the lapels and hauled him halfway off the floor. "I am divorcing her!" David yelled directly into Marcus' bloody face. "And I am going to the federal authorities right now to testify against you. I will make sure you rot in prison for what you did to my marriage and to Maya." David dropped Marcus back onto the floor in disgust. He turned around, ignoring Sarah completely, and stormed out of the house. He left Marcus bleeding in the center of the shattered glass, clutching his broken nose, as loud police sirens began wailing in the distance, heading straight toward them. I watched the live security feed from my corporate office as two police officers walked through the open front door of my grandmother's house. They found Marcus sitting in a pile of shattered glass, bleeding heavily onto the ruined rug. The officers did not care about his excuses. They placed Marcus in handcuffs for the domestic disturbance and took him directly to the local precinct. The federal authorities were already preparing their massive wire fraud case. By the next morning, the reality of total financial and social ruin had finally reached my mother-in-law. Cora was terrified. Her perfect golden child was sitting in a holding cell, and her precious high-class daughter-in-law was exposed as a broke fraud. Cora knew there was only one person who could possibly stop the federal hammer from coming down. She needed me. I was sitting behind my custom marble desk reviewing quarterly financial reports when my executive assistant buzzed the intercom. She told me there was a woman downstairs in the main lobby causing a massive scene. The woman was demanding to bypass security, claiming she was the mother-in-law of the chief executive officer. Cora was standing at the front desk wearing her finest Sunday church suit. She was aggressively waving her finger at the security guard, demanding immediate access to the top floor. "Send her up," I told my assistant, pressing the intercom button. "Let her see exactly what she threw away." 5 minutes later, the heavy glass doors to my corner office swung open. Cora stepped inside. She stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes widened as she took in the sheer scale of my corporate sanctuary. She looked at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire downtown skyline. This was not a little garage hobby. This was a multi-million-dollar fortress of power, and she was standing right in the middle of it. "Maya, my sweet girl," Cora said, her voice trembling slightly. She forced a bright, unnatural smile onto her face and took a few hesitant steps toward my desk. She clasped her hands tightly together in front of her chest, playing the role of the desperate, loving mother. "I am so glad I finally found you. We have been so terribly worried about you." I leaned back in my leather chair and folded my hands. I did not invite her to sit down. I did not offer her a glass of water. I simply stared at her, letting the silence stretch out until it became painfully awkward. "Please, Maya." Cora continued, her voice growing more frantic as my silence unnerved her. "You have to stop this madness. Marcus is in a holding cell. There are federal agents asking terrible questions about wire fraud and stolen property. He just made a silly mistake because he was under so much stress. It was all Sarah. That awful woman manipulated my innocent boy. You have to call the police and tell them it was just a big misunderstanding. You have to save our family reputation before the church congregation finds out." I looked at the woman who had spent the last 5 years making my life a living hell. She was actually asking me to commit perjury to save her precious social standing. "A silly mistake," I repeated, my voice cold and flat. "Forging my signature to steal a $2 million loan against my grandmother's house is not a silly mistake, Cora. It is a federal felony." "But we are family," Cora cried, taking another step forward. She reached across the marble desk, trying to grab my hand. I pulled my hand back immediately. "You cannot send your own husband to prison. What about forgiveness, Maya? What about the vows you took?" "Do not talk to me about vows," I snapped, sitting forward. "And do not ever use the word family with me again. You made it perfectly clear who your family was, Cora. For 5 years you treated me like dirt on your shoe. You constantly compared me to Sarah. You told everyone at your ridiculous church that Sarah was elevating your family status because she was white and supposedly wealthy. You called my products cheap oils. You told me I smelled like a dirty garage. I did not mean those things, Cora stammered, taking a step back. Her face flushed bright red. I was just trying to push you to be better. You pushed me straight to a $45 million valuation, I said smoothly. You worshipped a woman who was living entirely on credit card debt. You watched Sarah disrespect my home and you smiled. You told Marcus he deserved better than me. You stood on my front porch yesterday morning and told me I was a 33-year-old failure. You demanded my house keys so you could give my property to a gold digger. You enabled his arrogance and you cheered for my downfall. Maya, please, Cora sobbed. Real tears were finally falling down her wrinkled cheeks. The reality of her situation was crashing down on her. If Marcus goes to federal prison, our family is ruined. The church will strip me of my committee positions. We will lose everything. You already lost everything, Cora, I replied. I am not dropping the charges. I handed the audio recording directly to the federal authorities, and they are building an ironclad case. Marcus is going to spend the next 5 years sitting in a federal penitentiary. Sarah is getting divorced and sued for fraud. And you are going to have to explain to your church friends exactly why your perfect son is a convicted felon. Cora opened her mouth to scream, but no words came out. She looked around the massive luxury office, realizing she had zero power here in my world. She was completely defeated. Security will escort you out of the building now, I said, pressing the button on my desk. Have a wonderful day, Cora. Security will escort you out of the building now, I said, pressing the button on my desk. Have a wonderful day, Cora. Cora did not move toward the door. The fake tears that had been streaming down her face stopped instantly. Her entire posture shifted from a desperate weeping mother to a vicious, cornered animal. She planted her feet firmly on the thick carpet and glared at me with absolute hatred. If you think you can just dismiss me like one of your little employees, you are severely mistaken, Maya, she snarled, her voice echoing loudly in the spacious office. You might have your millions and your fancy glass tower, but you do not have the community. I built my reputation over 30 years in our church. I am the head of the hospitality committee. I direct the annual charity drive. People look up to me. They listen to me. I kept my hands folded neatly on my desk and simply watched her unravel. Her desperation was transforming into pure venom. If you do not call the federal authorities and drop these ridiculous charges right now, I will completely destroy your name, Cora threatened, taking a step back toward my desk. I will go straight to Pastor Thomas this evening. I will stand before the entire congregation on Sunday morning and tell them exactly what kind of woman you really are. I will tell them you are an abusive and neglectful wife. I will say you drove my poor son into a severe depression. I will tell them you locked him out of his own finances and forced him to seek comfort elsewhere because you were too obsessed with your greedy little business to be a proper wife. Her chest heaved as she delivered her twisted narrative. She was entirely confident that her lies would work. She had manipulated the church community for decades, using her status and her loud prayers to cover up her toxic behavior behind closed doors. I will make sure every single person in that sanctuary turns their back on you, Cora continued, her voice rising to a frantic pitch. I will tell them Sarah was just a victim of your cruel mind games. I will paint you as a bitter, vengeful monster who tried to frame her own husband for a crime he never committed. When I am finished with you, Maya, you will not be able to show your face in this city ever again. The church is my domain. I hold the power there, and you are absolutely nothing but a rebellious child who needs to be punished. She stood there panting slightly, waiting for me to break. She expected me to beg. She expected me to panic at the thought of losing my social standing in the community. She thought the threat of public humiliation would force me to surrender my leverage and save her precious son from prison. I let her words hang in the air for a long moment. The silence in the office was heavy and absolute. Then I slowly smiled. It was not a smile of anger or defensiveness. It was a smile of pure, untroubled victory. Your domain, I repeated softly, leaning forward in my leather chair. You truly believe you hold the power there, Cora? You think your 30 years of fake smiles and loud prayers can cover up the reality of who you are? I know they can, she snapped back, lifting her chin arrogantly. Pastor Thomas trusts me implicitly. He knows my heart. I nodded slowly. He certainly knows your heart now. I agreed. I reached out and placed my hand on the edge of my laptop. During our entire conversation, the screen had been facing away from Cora. I turned the laptop around, smoothly sliding it across the polished marble desk so it directly faced her. I think Pastor Thomas might have a slightly different opinion of your heart after hearing that entire speech, I said, pointing to the screen. Cora looked down at the laptop. Her face instantly drained of all color. Her jaw dropped open in a silent scream of absolute horror. The screen was filled with a live video call grid. In the center square sat Pastor Thomas, sitting behind the heavy wooden desk in his church study. Around him in the other video squares were all 6 members of the church elder board. They had been on a muted live stream since the exact moment my assistant told me Cora was in the lobby. They had heard every single word. They heard her admit that Marcus committed federal fraud. They heard her beg me to cover up his adultery. They heard her openly confess to protecting a gold digger like Sarah. And most devastatingly, they heard her meticulously plot to lie to the entire congregation and frame me as an abusive wife. Cora stared at the screen, completely paralyzed. Her hands began to shake violently. Pastor Thomas leaned forward into his camera. His face was a mask of profound sorrow and righteous anger. Sister Cora, Pastor Thomas said, his deep voice projecting clearly through my laptop speakers. We are entirely heartbroken and appalled by what we have just witnessed here today. For years, you have sat in our front pews preaching about honesty and family values. Yet we just listened to you demand that your daughter-in-law cover up a federal felony. We listened to you scheme to spread malicious lies about her character to our congregation. Pastor, please. Cora gasped, her voice barely a whisper. She dropped to her knees right there in the middle of my office, gripping the edge of my desk. It is not what it looks like. I was just upset. I was trying to protect my son. You were trying to protect your own pride, Sister Cora, the head elder added from his video square. You threatened to use the house of God to destroy an innocent woman. You have brought immense shame upon yourself and your family. We cannot allow this kind of toxic deception to poison our community. Pastor Thomas continued, his tone resolute and final. Effective immediately, you are stripped of your position on the hospitality committee. You are removed from the charity board. And until you seek genuine repentance and make this right, you are no longer welcome to hold any influence in our congregation. We will be praying for your soul, Cora, but we will not allow you to corrupt our church. No, Cora wailed, a horrible gut-wrenching sound that tore from her throat. She clawed at the edge of the desk, staring wildly at the laptop screen. You cannot do this to me. The church is my entire life. I have given thousands of dollars. You cannot throw me out. The video call abruptly ended. The screen went black, leaving Cora staring at her own terrified reflection. She collapsed completely onto the carpet, sobbing hysterically. Her entire identity had just been incinerated in less than 5 minutes. The social standing she valued above human decency was gone forever. The respect she craved was turned to ashes. The heavy glass doors of my office opened. 2 large security guards stepped inside, looking down at the weeping woman on the floor. Please escort this woman out of my building, I told the guards, my voice perfectly calm. And if she ever steps foot on this property again, call the police immediately. The guards reached down and grabbed Cora by her arms, hauling her unceremoniously to her feet. She did not even fight them. She was completely broken. Her mascara was running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. Her perfect Sunday suit was rumpled and ruined. She looked back at me one last time as they dragged her toward the door. There was no hatred left in her eyes, only the hollow, empty realization that she had destroyed her own life. I watched the doors swing shut behind her, feeling a deep sense of absolute peace. The toxic roots had finally been pulled from the ground. But a cornered animal is always the most dangerous. Marcus had managed to post bail using the last bits of credit he could scrape together from an old college friend. He was currently sitting on the sagging mattress of a cheap motel room on the extreme edge of town. The room smelled like stale cigarette smoke and cheap bleach. His nose was heavily bandaged from the brutal brawl with his brother David. The reality of his dire situation was finally suffocating him. He was facing severe federal wire fraud charges. He desperately needed a top-tier criminal defense attorney to keep him out of a federal penitentiary. Those specific elite lawyers required upfront retainers of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Marcus had absolutely nothing left to his name. His personal accounts were completely frozen by the federal government. His banking career was entirely over. His mother was publicly disgraced, and his mistress had abandoned him the moment the money vanished. He stared at his cheap burner phone, desperately trying to find a way out of this nightmare. Then a dark idea formed in his arrogant mind. It was a terrible and desperate idea. Several months ago, he had secretly taken a master access keycard from my purse, claiming he had accidentally thrown it away with the trash. He had kept it hidden in his golf bag, hoping to spy on my business operations one day. He knew M Beauty possessed proprietary organic cosmetic formulas that were worth tens of millions of dollars to rival corporate conglomerates. If he could steal those highly guarded formulas, he could sell them on the corporate black market. He could secure a massive cash payout, hire the best legal team in the country, and flee the state. At exactly 2:00 in the morning, Marcus drove his battered rental car into the downtown financial district. He parked 3 dark blocks away from the towering glass headquarters of M Beauty. He pulled a black hooded sweatshirt over his head and walked quickly through the cold shadows, avoiding the streetlights. He reached the rear service entrance of the massive building. His hands were shaking uncontrollably as he pulled the stolen plastic access card from his pocket. He pressed the card against the glowing digital security reader. The machine beeped softly, and the heavy metal door clicked open. Marcus smiled a wicked, desperate smile. He slipped quietly inside the dark building. He specifically avoided the main lobby cameras by taking the emergency concrete stairwell all the way up to the executive floor. His chest burned with fierce exhaustion by the time he reached the top level, but sheer adrenaline pushed him forward. He swiped the stolen card again and entered the silent, thickly carpeted hallway. He crept slowly toward my massive corner office, listening for security patrols. The heavy wooden door was locked, but the master keycard granted him immediate access. He stepped into my corporate sanctuary. The bright moonlight illuminated my custom marble desk. He walked over to my primary workstation. Sitting right there in the open, right next to my wireless keyboard, was a sleek silver flash drive. It possessed a white printed label that read, Master Formulas Quarter 4. Marcus could hardly believe his incredible luck. He grabbed the small metal drive, his eyes wide with uncontrollable greed. He quickly plugged the silver drive into the computer tower to verify the highly sensitive contents. The monitor flickered to life, displaying a massive secure directory of chemical compounds and global supplier manifests. It was the absolute holy grail of my entire cosmetic empire. Marcus laughed quietly in the dark, empty office. He safely ejected the drive and shoved it deep into the front pocket of his jeans. He turned around and hurried out of the office, carefully retracing his exact steps down the long concrete stairwell. He slipped out the back door and sprinted back to his hidden rental car. He locked the doors and gripped the steering wheel, panting heavily. He felt like an absolute strategic genius. He firmly believed he had outsmarted the woman who ruined his perfect life. He immediately pulled out his burner phone and dialed a shady contact he knew at a massive rival cosmetic conglomerate. He confidently told the corporate broker that he possessed the complete proprietary formulas for M Beauty. He aggressively demanded an immediate cash advance for the stolen data. The greedy broker agreed to meet him at a discreet high-end restaurant the following evening, which happened to be the Thanksgiving holiday. Marcus agreed eagerly, demanding a private dining room for the transaction. He drove back to his cheap motel room, dreaming of his glorious, wealthy comeback. He thought he had completely turned the tables on me and secured his ultimate freedom. He had absolutely no idea that I was sitting comfortably in my living room, sipping warm chamomile tea and watching his entire amateur heist play out in brilliant high definition. My laptop screen displayed multiple hidden camera angles of my executive office. I watched Marcus grab the silver flash drive and scramble out the door like a common pathetic thief. My lead corporate cybersecurity engineer was on a secure phone call with me, laughing softly at the screen. We had meticulously orchestrated the entire midnight break-in. When I realized the master keycard was missing months ago, I deliberately did not deactivate it. I simply restricted its access to a very specific set of decoy doors and set up an automatic silent alert system. When the perimeter alarm triggered tonight, I remotely unlocked my office door for him. The silver flash drive he stole did not contain my actual proprietary formulas. It contained thousands of pages of randomly generated chemical gibberish perfectly disguised under complex official file names. Much more importantly, the physical metal drive was embedded with a microscopic military-grade GPS tracking chip. Additionally, every single digital file on that drive carried a highly advanced traceable corporate watermark. The exact moment Marcus or any rival executive tried to open those encrypted files on an external computer network, my security team would instantly receive their exact global coordinates. Marcus honestly thought he was stealing his ultimate legal salvation. In brutal reality, he was just handing the federal prosecutors the final devastating nail for his own prison coffin. He had just officially upgraded his multiple crimes from attempted wire fraud to severe corporate espionage and grand larceny. I closed my laptop screen and finished my warm tea. The trap was now perfectly set for a spectacular Thanksgiving dinner. The trap was now perfectly set for a spectacular Thanksgiving dinner. Marcus awoke the next morning in his cheap motel room feeling an entirely unearned sense of absolute invincibility. He had secured the meeting with the corporate broker for 7 o'clock that evening. He was absolutely convinced he was about to walk away with millions of dollars in untraceable cash. His massive ego, heavily bruised over the past few days, rapidly inflated back to its normal arrogant size. He did not just want the money, he desperately wanted his social validation back. He wanted to look his mother Cora and his brother David directly in their eyes and prove that he was still the ultimate financial genius of the family. He wanted to show them that my corporate success was nothing compared to his strategic brilliance. He pulled out his burner phone and dialed a highly exclusive five-star restaurant located in the absolute center of the downtown district. It was a place famous for hosting wealthy celebrities and high-powered politicians. Marcus used the very last bit of his borrowed credit to aggressively reserve their largest private dining room. He ordered their most expensive Thanksgiving tasting menu, complete with imported truffles and vintage champagne. Once the reservation was confirmed, he began making his phone calls. He called his mother, Cora, first. Despite her public humiliation and absolute excommunication from her precious church, she answered his call immediately, weeping tears of relief. He promised her that everything was completely fixed and that he was about to secure a massive financial windfall that would restore their family name. He told her to wear her best dress and meet him at the restaurant. Then he called David. His brother hung up on him 3 times before finally answering. Marcus used every ounce of his manipulative charm. He apologized profusely for the brawl and the affair, blaming everything entirely on severe marital stress and Sarah's malicious seduction. He promised David that this dinner would explain everything and that there was a massive financial settlement involved that would benefit the entire family. David, driven by a mixture of deep familial obligation and sheer morbid curiosity, reluctantly agreed to attend. Finally, Marcus reached out to Sarah. She was currently staying in a cheap weekly rental apartment after David legally locked her out of their suburban home. She answered the phone, sounding completely miserable and defeated. Marcus did not apologize to her. He simply told her that he had secured the money and that she needed to show up to the dinner if she ever wanted to see a single dime of it. Her greed instantly overpowered her humiliation, and she agreed. Marcus smiled a cold, ruthless smile. He had successfully gathered his entire toxic audience for his grand, triumphant return. While Marcus was busy inflating his fragile ego, I was sitting in my sleek corporate boardroom surrounded by my elite legal team and 3 highly ranked federal agents from the white-collar crime division. The lead agent, a sharp-eyed man named Agent Miller, stood at the head of the conference table. He projected the live GPS tracking data from the stolen flash drive onto the massive presentation screen. The tiny red dot was currently stationary at a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. "He has not attempted to open the encrypted files yet," Agent Miller stated, crossing his arms over his dark suit. "But we have intercepted his burner phone communications. He scheduled a meeting with a known corporate data broker for tonight at 7. The broker is bringing the cash. The plan is to execute the data transfer and the financial exchange simultaneously, and he invited his entire family to a private dinner at the exact same time," I added, looking at the reservation details my assistant had easily acquired. "He is treating this felony like a victory lap." Agent Miller nodded, his expression completely serious. "We have agents currently positioning themselves inside the restaurant disguised as waitstaff and patrons. We are going to let him initiate the data transfer with the broker. The exact moment he plugs that drive into a laptop and attempts to decrypt your proprietary files, the watermark trace will trigger. That is the irrefutable evidence of corporate espionage. We need to lock him away for a very long time." My corporate attorney, Sterling, leaned forward. "And the bank fraud charges?" he asked. "Those are already finalized," Agent Miller replied. "We have the forged documents and the audio recording you provided, Maya. We are just piling on the charges at this point. He is digging a hole so deep he will never see the sun again." I looked at the glowing red dot on the screen, feeling a profound sense of cold anticipation. Marcus thought he was the ultimate predator, but he was just walking blindly into a meticulously designed cage. By 6:30 that evening, the private dining room at the exclusive restaurant was slowly filling with tension. The room was elegantly decorated with crystal chandeliers and heavy velvet curtains. Cora arrived first, wearing a dark conservative dress. Her face looked incredibly hollow, and she nervously avoided making eye contact with the restaurant staff. David arrived shortly after, standing rigidly near the door, completely refusing to speak to his mother. The atmosphere was thick and suffocating. At exactly 6:45, Sarah walked into the room. She was wearing a cheap knockoff dress, desperately trying to maintain her former upper-class facade. The moment David saw her, his jaw clenched so tightly, it looked like his teeth might shatter. Sarah tried to offer him a weak, pathetic smile, but he simply turned his back on her, staring blankly at the expensive wallpaper. Finally, at 10 minutes to 7, Marcus pushed open the heavy oak doors. He was wearing a brand new tailored suit purchased with the last of his borrowed money. His broken nose was heavily concealed under layers of expensive makeup. He walked into the room with his chest puffed out, an arrogant smile plastered across his face. He looked at his broken, miserable family and felt a surge of absolute power. He honestly believed he was about to save them all. He had absolutely no idea that I was currently stepping out of a black SUV right outside the restaurant doors, ready to deliver the final devastating blow. I stepped onto the pristine sidewalk, adjusting the collar of my custom-tailored emerald green silk suit. I had retired the cheap cotton dresses Marcus so deeply despised. Tonight, I was dressed explicitly for a corporate execution. Mr. Sterling stepped out of the vehicle right behind me, carrying a sleek black leather briefcase containing every single piece of evidence we had meticulously gathered. We walked through the rotating glass doors of the restaurant, projecting an aura of absolute untouchable authority. The maitre d' immediately recognized me from my previous high-profile corporate dinners and gave a respectful bow. I raised a single finger, signaling him to remain completely silent. I walked purposefully past the crowded main dining area, heading straight down the dimly lit corridor toward the exclusive private rooms. Through the thick, frosted glass of the heavy oak doors, I could already hear Marcus projecting his loud, arrogant voice. I paused for a brief moment, listening to the absolute delusion echoing from inside the room. Marcus was standing at the head of the long mahogany table, holding a crystal glass of vintage champagne high in the air. To new beginnings, he declared, his voice dripping with unbearable smugness. "I know the past 24 hours have been incredibly stressful for this family. But I promised you all that I would take care of everything, and I always deliver. Tonight, I am officially closing a massive corporate transaction that will completely elevate our financial standing. We are talking about generational wealth. We will never have to worry about petty banking politics or unstable spouses ever again. I could hear Cora murmur a loud, enthusiastic agreement, clapping her hands together like a devoted disciple. Even Sarah let out a soft, greedy sigh, completely forgetting her humiliating eviction just to bask in the promise of imaginary money. I placed both of my hands flat against the heavy oak doors and pushed them wide open with tremendous force. The heavy wood slammed against the interior walls with a loud, violent crack that echoed like a gunshot. The entire room went completely dead silent. Marcus froze with his champagne glass suspended in midair. His arrogant smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. Cora gasped loudly, clutching her pearl necklace as if she had just seen a terrifying ghost. David slowly lowered his drink. His eyes darting between me and his brother Sarah just stared, her jaw dropping open in pure shock. I stepped into the private dining room with Mr. Sterling standing firmly right beside me. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice perfectly calm and measured. "I hope I am not interrupting a celebration of federal crimes." Marcus' face flushed a dark, angry crimson. He slammed his crystal glass down onto the mahogany table, splashing expensive champagne across the white linen cloth. "What the hell are you doing here, Maya?" he yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. "Who let you inside? This is a private family dinner." He turned aggressively toward the two waiters standing quietly in the corner of the room. "Get her out of here," he barked, waving his hand frantically. "Call the security guards and throw this woman out into the street immediately. She is completely unstable, and she is trespassing." The waiters exchanged nervous glances and took a hesitant step forward. I did not even flinch. I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out a solid metal black card. I held it up between my index and middle fingers. I turned my attention directly to the head manager, who had just rushed into the room after hearing the loud commotion. "I would like to reserve this entire private dining wing for the next hour," I told the manager, my tone commanding and absolute. "Clear the staff and close the corridor. Put the entire buyout on this card right now." The manager looked at the exclusive metal card, then looked at Marcus' cheap rented suit. The financial hierarchy was instantly recognized. "Of course, madam," the manager said, bowing deeply. He signaled the waitstaff and they immediately evacuated the room, closing the heavy oak doors firmly behind them. The click of the heavy door latch sounded like a prison cell locking shut. Marcus was completely trapped. His grand illusion of wealth and control had just been entirely purchased from right underneath him. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The absolute silence in the room was deafening. Then Sarah decided to make the worst mistake of her entire life. Desperate to regain her fading upper-class persona, she stood up from her chair and crossed her arms. She looked me up and down with a pathetic, mocking sneer. "You think you are so incredibly powerful just because you bought a flashy green suit, Maya?" Sarah laughed, her voice high and grating. "You can flash a credit card all you want, but you are still just a pathetic woman who lost her husband. Marcus is moving on to much bigger things. You are just embarrassing yourself by showing up here begging for his attention." I slowly turned my gaze away from Marcus and focused entirely on Sarah. She shifted uncomfortably under my cold, dead stare. "I am definitely not here for your recycled garbage." "Sarah," I replied, keeping my voice dangerously low. "I am simply here to deliver a message. You should probably stop worrying about my wardrobe and start worrying about your own criminal record." Sarah frowned, her fake confidence faltering slightly. "What are you talking about?" she snapped. I smiled, a slow, ruthless smile. "I am talking about the federal tax audit," I said clearly. "Mrs. Jenkins called the IRS this morning and reported the massive discrepancies in your boutique filings. They are currently seizing your remaining bank accounts as we speak. You are officially and completely broke. Sarah." Every single penny you ever secretly hid from David is permanently gone. You will be facing severe federal tax evasion charges now. Sarah collapsed back into her velvet chair as if all the bones in her legs had suddenly completely dissolved. Her face turned an ashen shade of gray. She opened her mouth, but the only sound that escaped was a pathetic, shallow wheeze. She looked desperately at Marcus, but he was too busy trying to salvage his own rapidly sinking ship to care about her problems. Marcus marched toward me, his fists clenched tight at his sides. He tried to physically block my path, but Mr. Sterling stepped smoothly in front of me, a silent, imposing wall of legal authority. "Move out of my way, Marcus," I ordered, my voice echoing in the quiet room. "You invited your family here to celebrate a massive corporate transaction. I think it is only fair that we show them exactly what kind of transaction you were planning." Before Marcus could even process my words, I walked directly over to the media console built into the mahogany wall. I knew this restaurant well. I knew they used this specific private room for high-level corporate presentations. I pulled a small connection cable from my designer handbag and plugged it straight into my laptop. I tapped a single button on the console. A massive high-definition projector screen hummed to life and slowly descended from the ceiling right behind the dining table. "What are you doing?" Marcus demanded, his voice panicked. "Turn that off right now, Maya. This is a private family gathering." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to scream to command the room. The truth is always the loudest voice in any room. I clicked the spacebar on my laptop. The projector screen illuminated the dark room with a bright white glow. A simple audio file graphic appeared on the massive screen. I pressed play and cranked the volume dial to maximum. The crystal clear audio from my master bathroom filled the restaurant. Everyone in the room heard the heavy oak door click shut. They heard Sarah's high-pitched voice complaining about the smell of cheap shea butter in my house. Then they heard the undeniable sound of Marcus and Sarah sharing a wet, intimate kiss. Cora gasped, covering her mouth with both hands. David closed his eyes, his jaw muscles ticking violently. But the audio did not stop at simple infidelity. The recording continued broadcasting Marcus' arrogant laughter as he instructed Sarah to get the paperwork. The entire family listened in absolute frozen horror as Marcus bragged about practicing my signature for 3 months. They heard him explicitly detail his plan to steal a $2 million collateral loan, let the bank foreclose on my grandmother's house, and buy a mansion in the Hamptons with his brother's wife. The audio file ended, leaving a ringing, suffocating silence in the private dining room. Marcus stood completely frozen, his face drained of all blood. Cora was shaking her head back and forth violently, whispering the word "no" over and over again, as if she could magically erase the recording. David looked at Sarah with a level of pure disgust that words could never accurately describe. But I was not finished. "You told them you were closing a massive corporate transaction tonight," I said, clicking to the next slide. "Let us look at your new business venture, Marcus." The screen shifted to a digital map overlaid with a bright red tracking path. Right beside the map, a crystal-clear security video began playing. It showed Marcus wearing a black hooded sweatshirt sneaking into my corporate office at 2:00 in the morning. The camera zoomed in perfectly on his face as he stole the silver flash drive from my desk. "You broke into my headquarters last night," I explained to the silent room. "You stole what you thought were my proprietary cosmetic formulas. You planned to sell them to a corporate broker tonight to pay for your criminal defense lawyer. But you are incredibly stupid, Marcus. I let you steal a decoy drive embedded with a military-grade tracking chip. You did not secure generational wealth. You secured a federal charge for corporate espionage." Marcus backed away from the screen, stumbling over the legs of a heavy wooden chair. He looked like a trapped animal. He looked wildly around the room, searching for an escape route, but the heavy oak doors were securely locked from the inside. "Please, Maya," he begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic whimper. "You do not have to do this in front of my mother. Stop the presentation. We can handle this privately." I ignored his pathetic pleading and clicked to the final slide. A massive scanned document appeared on the projector screen. It was an official letterhead from Marcus' former bank. It was the absolute rejection notice for his $2 million forged loan. Right below the bank letter was a copy of my irrevocable trust document proving that the house he tried to steal belonged to a corporate entity. The bank did not just deny your fraudulent loan, Marcus. I said, my voice completely steady and cold. Your boss fired you immediately. He stripped your credentials and handed all your forged paperwork directly to the federal authorities. You do not have a job. You do not have a bank account. You do not have a house, and after tonight you will not have your freedom either. The facade of the perfect golden child was entirely incinerated. Cora burst into loud, hysterical tears, completely unable to process the absolute destruction of her precious son. David stood up from his chair. He looked at his brother with eyes that were completely dead. You are completely repulsive, David said, his voice eerily calm. I never want to see your faces again. David walked purposefully toward the heavy oak doors and left the room without ever looking back. Marcus collapsed into a chair, crying loud, ugly sobs of pure defeat. I closed my laptop, completely and forever done. The finality of the snapping plastic seemed to break something deep inside Marcus' mind. His pathetic whimpering suddenly stopped completely right in that exact moment. He slowly looked at the blank projector screen and then looked directly at me. His face contorted into a mask of pure, unhinged rage. He let out a primal scream that tore through his throat and grabbed the heavy edge of the mahogany dining table. He strained his arms, attempting to flip the massive piece of furniture in a violent tantrum. Silverware clattered loudly, and expensive crystal champagne flutes shattered against the floor as the table tilted violently. He wanted to destroy something physically because his entire fabricated reality had just been obliterated. You ruined my life, he roared, launching himself forward across the tilted table, trying to reach me. Mr. Sterling stepped forward again, but he did not even need to raise a hand. Before Marcus could even clear the edge of the fallen chairs, the heavy frosted glass doors of the private dining room burst completely open. A team of 5 federal agents wearing dark tactical windbreakers stormed into the room. Agent Miller led the formation, his badge gleaming brightly against his chest. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Agent Miller shouted, his deep voice cutting through the chaos with absolute authority. Marcus, freeze right there, and keep your hands where I can see them. Marcus froze mid-lunge, his eyes wide with sheer terror. 2 large federal agents grabbed him by the shoulders and slammed him roughly against the wood-paneled wall. The physical impact knocked the remaining breath from his lungs. Marcus, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, attempted bank fraud, and severe corporate espionage. Agent Miller recited, reading smoothly from a small black notebook. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you use it right now. The cold, metallic click of heavy handcuffs ratcheting around Marcus' wrists echoed loudly in the quiet room. Cora shrieked loudly in pure agony. She rushed forward, grabbing the sleeves of the federal agents. Please, you cannot take him! She wailed, her expensive church dress dragging through the spilled champagne and broken glass. He is a good boy. He is a bank executive. You are making a terrible mistake. One of the agents gently but firmly pushed her back. Step away, ma'am, the agent warned sternly. Do not interfere with a federal arrest or you will be detained for obstruction. Cora collapsed onto her knees, weeping uncontrollably into her hands. The golden child she had worshipped her entire life was currently being searched and patted down like a common street criminal right in front of her eyes. All of her pride, all of her social climbing, all of her malicious comparisons to my success had culminated in this pathetic, miserable moment. Marcus did not even look at his mother. He stared blankly at the floor, completely broken and humiliated beyond repair. While the federal agents were busy securing Marcus and dealing with Cora's hysterical outbursts, I noticed a shadow moving quietly along the far wall. It was Sarah. She was clutching her cheap knockoff purse tightly against her chest, creeping slowly toward the secondary exit that led through the restaurant kitchen. She honestly believed that the chaos of Marcus' arrest would provide the perfect cover for her to escape into the night and avoid her own legal disaster. She reached out and pushed the swinging wooden door open, sliding her slender frame through the narrow gap. She thought she was free. She thought she had outsmarted everyone one last time. I walked calmly across the room and pushed the swinging door open, following right behind her. The restaurant kitchen was completely empty of staff, as the manager had cleared the entire wing. Sarah was speed-walking toward the rear alley exit, her high heels clicking frantically against the industrial tile floor. But before her hand could even touch the metal push bar of the exit door, the door swung open from the outside. A familiar figure stepped out of the dark alleyway directly into the bright kitchen light. It was Mrs. Jenkins. She was wearing her best Sunday coat and holding her favorite leather handbag, looking incredibly pleased with herself. "Where exactly do you think you are going, honey?" Mrs. Jenkins asked, her voice dripping with sweet Southern sarcasm. "The party is just getting started." Sarah stumbled backward, gasping in shock. "Move out of my way, you crazy old woman," Sarah hissed, trying to shove past her. But Mrs. Jenkins simply stepped aside, revealing a tall, stern-looking man wearing a gray suit standing right behind her in the alley doorway. Sarah froze completely. The man reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a gold badge. "I am Special Agent Davis, with the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division." The man announced, his voice cold and flat. "Sarah, you are under arrest for massive tax evasion, persistent corporate tax fraud, and money laundering related to your boutique business." Two armed officers stepped out from the shadows of the alleyway and walked straight towards Sarah. She dropped her fake designer purse onto the greasy kitchen floor. She looked back at me, standing in the doorway, watching her entire world crumble into absolute dust. I did not blink. I did not offer her a single ounce of sympathy. She spent years using fake wealth to make me feel small in my home. Now she was completely exposed as a desperate, broke criminal. The officers grabbed her arms, pulling them forcefully behind her back. Another pair of heavy steel handcuffs clicked shut, finalizing her absolute destruction. The sound was incredibly satisfying. I slowly walked back out into the main dining room. Marcus was being dragged toward the front doors by the federal agents. Cora was still sobbing violently on the floor, clutching a broken piece of a crystal glass. The toxic family that spent years trying to destroy my spirit was utterly annihilated. 6 months passed since that explosive night at the restaurant. I found myself sitting on a hard wooden bench in the back row of a sterile federal courtroom. The air conditioning hummed a low, steady drone that filled the heavy silence. I wore a tailored ivory suit, projecting the absolute peace and clarity I finally felt. The heavy wooden doors at the side of the room opened, and two armed bailiffs escorted Marcus into the courtroom. He was completely unrecognizable from the arrogant loan officer who used to buy expensive watches to impress his mistress. He was wearing a baggy orange prison jumpsuit. His shoulders were slumped, and his hair was thinning rapidly from the severe stress of his ruined life. He shuffled toward the defense table, his wrists bound by heavy steel chains that clinked loudly against each other. There was no sign of his mother, Cora. She had completely abandoned him, unable to face the public shame of associating with a convicted felon. There was certainly no sign of Sarah, who was currently fighting her own brutal legal battles against the Internal Revenue Service while living in a tiny studio apartment. Marcus was completely alone. The federal judge, a stern woman with absolutely no patience for corporate greed, slammed her wooden gavel down. She did not mince her words. She berated Marcus for abusing his position of financial trust and attempting to steal generational wealth from his own wife. She sentenced him to 5 solid years in a federal penitentiary with absolutely no possibility of early parole. As the bailiffs moved forward to take him away, Marcus turned around and desperately searched the gallery. His sunken eyes locked onto mine. He pressed his chained hands against the wooden railing. "Maya, please," he choked out, his voice echoing in the quiet courtroom. "I am so sorry. Please forgive me. Just give me one more chance." I looked at the man I had once promised to spend my life with. I expected to feel a flicker of sadness or perhaps a tiny pang of pity, but there was absolutely nothing. The space inside my chest where my love for him used to reside was completely empty. I did not nod. I did not smile. I did not even frown. I simply stared right through him with absolute cold indifference. I picked up my designer handbag, stood up from the wooden bench, and walked out of the courtroom without ever looking back. He was no longer my husband. He was just an inmate. The transition from that cold, sterile courtroom to the vibrant warmth of my grandmother's house was the most beautiful contrast of my entire life. It was finally the fourth Thursday of November. It was Thanksgiving Day. But this year, the sprawling brick colonial was not filled with the suffocating tension of toxic blood relatives. It was not polluted by Cora passive-aggressive insults or Sarah desperate attempts to act wealthy. The house smelled exactly the way it was supposed to smell. The rich aroma of roasted turkey, candied yams, and fresh-baked cornbread drifted through the air. Warm yellow light spilled from the vintage chandeliers, illuminating a house that was finally filled with genuine love. I walked into the dining room carrying a massive silver platter. The long mahogany table was completely surrounded by my chosen family. Mrs. Jenkins sat right at the head of the table wearing a bright purple dress and laughing loudly while pouring a generous glass of red wine. Beside her sat Mr. Sterling, who had traded his intimidating legal suits for a comfortable cashmere sweater. The rest of the table was packed with my loyal friends, my top corporate executives, and several young female entrepreneurs I was currently mentoring through my new business foundation. These were people who respected my ambition. These were people who celebrated my success instead of trying to tear it down out of petty jealousy. I set the platter down and gently tapped my crystal glass with a silver spoon. The lively conversation slowly faded, and all those smiling faces turned toward me. I raised my glass high. "I want to thank every single one of you for being here today," I said, my voice thick with genuine emotion. "This past year taught me a very harsh but incredibly necessary lesson. I learned that family is not always defined by a shared last name or a legal marriage certificate. Family is defined by the people who stand by you when the absolute worst storms hit. It is defined by the people who fiercely protect your peace and celebrate your victories without a single ounce of envy." My grandmother built this house with her own two hands to be a sanctuary of love and strength. For a long time, I let the wrong people inside. I let them disrespect her legacy and try to steal what she worked so hard to create. But tonight, this house is finally purified. It is filled with brilliant, loyal, and beautiful souls. To my chosen family. The entire table raised their glasses, cheering loudly and echoing the toast. I looked around the room, feeling an overwhelming wave of profound gratitude. My cosmetics empire was rapidly expanding across the globe. My personal wealth was entirely secured. But the greatest victory of all was the absolute peace I felt standing right there in my grandmother's dining room. I had survived the ultimate betrayal and emerged completely untouchable. Every single day moving forward is a beautiful new opportunity to completely rebuild your reality away from the heavy chains of the past and to boldly step into a brilliant future filled with endless possibilities and joy. Sometimes the trash takes itself out, but sometimes you have to bag it up yourself. If you have ever had to cut toxic family members out of your life to protect your peace and your empire, drop a comment below. Do not forget to hit subscribe for more stories of sweet revenge. The most profound lesson to take away from Maya's journey is that a marriage certificate or shared DNA never obligates you to endure toxic, manipulative behavior. Society frequently pressures us to forgive and forget in the name of keeping the family together, but continuously enduring disrespect only drains your own potential. Marcus and his mother built their fragile identities on diminishing Maya, dangerously mistaking her grace, patience, and quiet focus for weakness and incompetence. Furthermore, Maya's story teaches us the extraordinary power of moving in silence and letting your actions speak. While her husband and his family were busy performing for their social circles and projecting a loud facade of wealth, Maya was doing the actual grueling work in the shadows. She did not waste her precious energy trying to verbally convince them of her worth or begging to be validated by people committed to misunderstanding her. Instead, she let her undeniable success, meticulous preparation, and ironclad boundaries do the talking. True power does not need to announce itself at dinner parties. It simply builds an empire while others are distracted by their own inflated egos. Ultimately, this narrative completely redefines what it means to have a family. Biology and marriage might make you relatives, but consistent respect, unwavering loyalty, and mutual support are what truly make you a family. By the end of her ordeal, Maya finds her sanctuary not by trying to fix the broken people who betrayed her, but by completely severing those venomous ties. She chose to surround herself with a chosen family who genuinely celebrates her light rather than trying to extinguish it. If you are currently holding on to a toxic relationship out of sheer obligation, take a courageous step today to enforce your boundaries and reclaim your peace.